She always believed she could read people in moments, the way some people can tell the weather by the wind. Her life had been a series of patterns, faces that smiled too easily, hands that lingered too long, voices that promised more than they could give. She thought she understood the world until the day he moved in. He wasn't flashy. He didn't announce himself with noise or charm. In fact, he seemed almost invisible at first, just another figure in the corner of the lobby, polite, reserved, carrying himself with a quiet confidence that somehow unsettled her. He smiled softly when their eyes met, never bold, never intrusive, and she found herself drawn to the calm in his presence, even as her instinct screamed caution. Her friends had warned her. "Watch out," they said. "Not every quiet person is kind. Sometimes they're hiding storms you can't handle." She had laughed then, thinking she knew storms better than anyone. But she hadn't met him yet. He had a presence that didn't demand attention, but commanded it. It wasn't in the way he walked or spoke, but in the subtle way he existed, like a force of nature contained within the shape of a man. People noticed, without realizing they were noticing. She noticed, and that was enough to unsettle everything she thought she knew. She first saw him from across the hallway, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, dust motes dancing around him like tiny sparks. He was holding a box, something unremarkable, yet there was a care in the way he carried it that spoke volumes. He didn't rush. He didn't stumble. Everything about him suggested control, not arrogance, not pride, but a deep, steady certainty that made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't expected. For weeks, she watched him silently. Observing wasn't unusual for her. It was how she survived. She cataloged every gesture, every choice of words, every nuance of expression. She could predict most people within days. But him, he was a puzzle that refused to be solved each time. She thought she understood. Something subtle shifted a glance, a small act of kindness, a quiet determination, and she realized she had been entirely wrong. Then came the night when the power went out, the kind of blackout that leaves a city in darkness, where every familiar street lamp and window becomes a phantom. She was stranded, outside her apartment, keys in her bag, phone dead, heart racing with frustration and a hint of panic. She didn't expect anyone to help. She didn't even consider him. And yet, when she turned the corner, there he was, standing in the shadows of the hallway, barefoot, holding a lantern, eyes soft but alert. "You can wait here," he said simply, his voice calm, steady, without a trace of condescension. It wasn't heroic in the dramatic sense. It wasn't a rescue scene from a movie. But it was more than enough, more than she realized she needed. There was no showmanship, no attempt to impress, just presence, patience, and an unspoken assurance that somehow things would be okay. That night, she began to see him differently, not through the lens of assumptions or patterns or previous mistakes, but as he truly was. And what she saw surprised her. He wasn't weak, as she had assumed. He wasn't fragile or distant or unfeeling. He carried a strength that was quiet, a resilience that didn't shout but endured. It was the kind of strength that allowed him to remain composed in the chaos, to offer comfort without controlling it, to stand firm without pressing down. She had spent years seeking fireworks, searching for the kind of intensity that demanded attention. But she was learning, in that dimly lit hallway, that true power didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived softly, almost unnoticed, but it changed everything around it simply by existing. In that moment, she realized that life had been teaching her a lesson she hadn't wanted to learn. Strength wasn't always visible. It wasn't loud. It didn't always fit the expectations she had built from watching others. And yet, it was there in quiet gestures, in steady hands, in eyes that listened and waited. As the hours passed and the blackout stretched on, she found herself talking to him in ways she rarely talked to anyone. No pretenses, no games, no masks, just honest conversation, laughter, and the comforting weight of someone who understood boundaries yet shared his presence generously. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not because he looked at her, but because he understood her without needing her to explain every detail. And as she finally returned to her apartment, keys in hand and heart a little lighter, she knew something fundamental had shifted. The world she thought she understood, her assumptions about people, about love, about what strength looked like had been quietly challenged. And in that challenge, she found something she hadn't expected. Hope. Hope that real connections could exist without pretense. Hope that strength could be gentle. Hope that life had surprises powerful enough to leave her breathless, not with shock, but with awe. She had thought she knew what she wanted, what she needed. But life, it seemed, had other plans. Plans that involved patience, quiet courage, and a man who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but whose presence alone had the power to change everything. That night, she realized that sometimes the most profound lessons don't arrive with fanfare or fireworks. Sometimes they come softly, insistently, and quietly remind you that life is capable of more than you imagined. And in the heart of the darkness, she began to understand. What seemed soft was never weak. It was strength, measured and infinite, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And she knew, even without knowing how or why, that her life was about to change forever. The morning after the blackout, the city seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if it too had been shaken awake. She walked into the lobby, coffee in hand, expecting the familiar routine of hurried greetings and distracted faces. Instead, she found him already there, standing near the elevator, reading quietly, calm as if the night had never happened. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure why her heart still raced at the sight of him. She had never been like this, never allowed herself to linger on someone without an agenda, without a plan. And yet, the way he moved, the way he carried the air around him, made her pause. There was a subtle power in his calm, a kind of magnetism that didn't demand attention, but drew it effortlessly. He glanced up, smiled softly, and held the door open. That simple gesture, so ordinary, so small, made her realize she had been measuring people all wrong. She had been looking for noise, for grand displays, for gestures that screamed strength. But he had shown her that strength could be silent, deliberate, unwavering, and it fascinated her. The next few days were a study in subtle tension. She watched him interact with neighbors, the way he offered help without expecting thanks, the way he listened before speaking, the patience in his every motion. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to notice herself adjusting, unconsciously searching for ways to be noticed, ways to be understood, not through words or performance, but through presence. It was in the little moments that she realized the depth of his character. When a child dropped a toy in the lobby, he didn't just pick it up, he knelt, smiled, and handed it back with a word of encouragement. When the mail arrived late, he calmly sorted it, ensuring everyone got their letters without complaint. He didn't seek admiration. He didn't crave attention. And that quiet integrity, she realized, was more powerful than anything she had ever encountered. Her friends noticed the change too. They teased her, asking what had gotten into her, why she lingered in the hallways longer than necessary, why she smiled more often at the mundane. She didn't have an answer, not one she could articulate without feeling foolish. It wasn't attraction, not entirely. It was recognition, seeing strength where she had expected weakness, seeing purpose where she had assumed apathy. Then came the evening, when she was caught in the rain, heavy, relentless, soaking everything within moments. She cursed herself for leaving her umbrella, for miscalculating the weather, for the way life seemed determined to remind her that control was an illusion. And there he was, appearing as if summoned by fate, holding a spare umbrella with the quiet patience of someone who had anticipated the world's little cruelties. "You'll get sick," he said simply, his voice calm, carrying no judgment, only concern. "Here," and without waiting for her protest, he offered her the umbrella. The gesture was simple, almost mundane, yet it carried a weight that made her chest tighten. It wasn't about saving her from the rain, it was about showing her that care could exist without expectation, that attention could be given without strings attached. In that moment, she began to understand that she had spent years measuring worth by noise, by drama, by visible signs of achievement or dominance. She had mistaken showmanship for strength, flash for resilience. And here was someone who had never shouted, never demanded, never boasted, and yet possessed a force that reshaped the world around him simply by existing in it. Over the weeks, their interactions grew in quiet significance. They shared fleeting conversations in the hallways, exchanged smiles over morning coffee, and slowly, imperceptibly, built a rhythm. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was connection, genuine and rare, the kind that left her thinking long after he had gone. She began to see patterns in her own behavior, recognizing the walls she had built around herself, the defenses she had relied on for years, and she realized that part of her fascination with him wasn't just about him, it was about what he revealed in her. He made her reconsider her definitions of power, of control, of influence. She began to see that true strength wasn't measured in assertiveness alone, nor in the ability to dominate a room. It was in patience, in understanding, in the courage to be steady when the world demanded chaos. It was in the willingness to act without needing applause, to protect without needing recognition, to guide without imposing. One afternoon, as they both reached for the same package in the lobby, their hands brushed. It was a brief, fleeting touch, yet it sent a jolt through her she hadn't anticipated. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability not in him, but in herself. She had been unprepared for this subtle shift, this awakening of feelings she had long convinced herself were reserved for dramatic, passionate encounters, and yet, there was nothing dramatic here. There was only presence, intention, and authenticity. It was a different kind of power, one that commanded attention without demanding it, that inspired respect without insisting on it, that built trust without forcing it, and she found herself drawn not to his appearances, but to his essence, the quiet force that shaped every interaction, every choice, every word. That evening, as she returned to her apartment, she realized she had been living in a world of assumptions, mistaking noise for meaning, flash for substance. He had shown her that life could be measured differently, that strength could exist in silence, that impact could be gentle yet profound, and in that realization, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope that connections could be authentic, unforced, transformative. Hope that life could surprise her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Hope that she could learn to trust not just others, but herself, in recognizing the depth beneath the surface, and most of all, hope that perhaps she had underestimated the world around her and the quiet power that could change it entirely. As night fell, and the city lights shimmered through her window, she thought of him again, standing quietly in the lobby, unassuming yet undeniable. And she understood, with a clarity that both exhilarated and humbled her, that life's most profound lessons often arrived softly, without warning, in ways that left you forever changed. She had believed she knew strength, she had believed she understood power, but he had taught her that what seemed quiet could be the most transformative force of all, and that recognition, patience, and authenticity could move hearts more than any grand gesture ever could. And as she drifted into sleep that night, she carried with her a new perspective, a seed of inspiration, and the undeniable truth that sometimes the most remarkable transformations in life start with the smallest, quietest moments of courage and presence. The weekend came with an unusual quiet over the city, as if the world had paused to take a breath. She found herself wandering through the nearby park, a book in hand, but barely reading the words, her mind replaying the previous days, the small encounters, the subtle shifts she couldn't quite name. And then she saw him, sitting on a bench, beneath a towering oak, sketchbook open, pen moving with deliberate ease. The sight struck her unexpectedly, seeing him outside the structured walls of their apartment, removed from routine, revealed a new layer she hadn't imagined. He looked up as she approached, eyes bright, calm, inviting, and without a word, gestured to the empty space beside him. She hesitated, then sat down, feeling the strange tension of anticipation, mixed with something more profound, a sense that time itself had slowed to accommodate this encounter. "You come here often?" she asked, though it sounded more like an effort to speak than a real question. He smiled, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that made her notice everything: the slight tilt of his head, the quiet warmth in his gaze, the patience that seemed to flow naturally from him. "Sometimes," he said simply, "it's quiet. You notice things here that you might miss in a hurry." And she realized immediately that this was no ordinary conversation. This was a lesson disguised as casual talk, an insight into the way someone could move through the world with purpose, calm, and unspoken wisdom. Her curiosity was piqued, but more than that, she felt the stirrings of inspiration, the kind that came when you realized someone lived their life deliberately. And in watching them, you couldn't help but reflect on your own path. For hours, they sat in quiet companionship, sharing small observations, the way sunlight filtered through leaves, the laughter of children playing, the rhythm of life passing. Unnoticed to the impatient eye, he spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were true. And with every statement, every pause, she felt a shift in herself, a softening of old assumptions, a questioning of habits she had long held. By the time the sun began to dip, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold, she realized she had shared more of herself than she had in months, perhaps even years. She spoke of her career, the pressures, the constant need to perform, the fear of failure that sometimes shadowed her achievements. And he listened, not with judgment, but with a kind of focused presence that made her feel seen, understood, and strangely valued. "You push yourself hard," he said after a long silence. "It's admirable, but strength isn't just about endurance or control. It's also about understanding limits, recognizing balance, and letting life teach you without resistance." The words resonated in a way that surprised her. She had always equated strength with perseverance, with the refusal to yield. And yet, here was a man whose strength was rooted in observation, in patience, in the ability to act when necessary and remain still when the world demanded noise. His kind of power was subtle, and it unsettled her because it demanded reflection, not reaction. The days that followed carried a subtle rhythm. She found herself seeking him in the hallways, lingering near him in the lobby, exchanging smiles that had grown into small conversations. Each interaction left her inspired, challenged, and contemplative. She realized she was learning not from grand lessons, but from the quiet, deliberate actions of a man who had mastered himself before seeking to understand the world. Then came the evening of the charity gala, an event she had dreaded more for its social obligations than for any real excitement. She arrived, high heels clicking against the marble floors, rehearsing lines, balancing charm with professionalism. And there he was, across the room, quietly observing, calm, composed, a presence that didn't shout but drew attention inescapably. He approached her, offering a small nod of recognition that somehow steadied her nerves. "You look determined tonight," he said. The words simple, but with an undertone that made her feel seen beyond the surface. Through the evening, she noticed him again and again, not through grand gestures, but through subtle interactions. How he listened intently to the staff, how he acknowledged effort quietly, how he seemed to radiate respect for everyone in the room, regardless of status or title. She realized then that influence didn't have to be loud. It could be rooted in integrity, consistency, and genuine care. As the gala drew to a close, she found herself outside, taking a breath in the cool night air, reflecting on the unexpected lessons of the past weeks. And he joined her silently, the presence alone enough to make her pulse quicken. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the world is loud enough for everyone else. But real change, real impact, starts quietly, in moments people barely notice." Those words lingered long after the night ended. She walked home with a new awareness, understanding that her definitions of success, strength, and influence had been incomplete. She realized that inspiration wasn't always flashy, and power didn't always roar. Sometimes it existed in quiet courage, in patience, in the way one could move through life deliberately, leaving small ripples that eventually changed everything. For the first time in a long while, she felt not the pressure to perform, but the urge to observe, learn, and grow. She thought about her past choices, the relationships she had rushed into, the people she had underestimated, and the walls she had built to protect herself. And she realized that those walls were slowly coming down, not because someone tore them apart, but because someone had shown her, through presence and consistency, that strength could be gentle, resilience could be quiet, and impact could be profound without ever being loud. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the ripple effect of small actions. She thought about patience, respect, deliberate care, and the subtle power that could shape lives in ways often invisible to the casual observer. And in that reflection, she understood something fundamental. True inspiration didn't demand spectacle. It demanded authenticity, intentionality, and the courage to live in a way that aligned with one's deepest values. She drifted into sleep, carrying with her the quiet realization that she had witnessed something extraordinary, not just in him, but in the way life could unfold when one embraced subtle strength, deliberate patience, and authentic connection. And in that understanding, she felt a spark of transformation, a deep-seated belief that her own journey of growth and discovery was only just beginning. The following week began with an unusual tension, one that she could feel even before opening her eyes. Life seemed heavier, more vivid at the same time, as if every small detail carried a hidden meaning she had been too busy to notice before. She couldn't pinpoint exactly why, but the encounters with him were no longer just fleeting moments. They had become benchmarks, subtle measures of clarity she hadn't realized she'd been craving. Her work demanded precision, deadlines that felt like pressure cookers, clients whose expectations never ceased to escalate. She had always thrived on stress, on proving her competence in high-pressure situations. But this week, there was a difference. The way he carried himself, the way he observed without judgment, lingered in her mind. It created a quiet tension that was neither fear nor desire. It was curiosity, the kind that forced introspection. She walked into her office on Monday morning with a newfound sense of awareness. Every email, every phone call, every interaction with her team felt sharper. Not because she was working harder, but because she was thinking deeper. She was learning to observe, to listen, to anticipate without reacting impulsively. And somewhere, in the midst of this subtle evolution, she realized he had become her silent mentor. Not in the conventional sense, but in the way someone can inspire transformation simply by existing with integrity, patience, and self-assuredness. That evening, she found herself walking along the riverside, the city lights reflecting in the water, a mirror of the life she was beginning to see differently. She hadn't planned to meet him, yet there he was, leaning casually against the railing, sketching the skyline with the same quiet precision she had noticed in the park. "You're here again," she said, though the words were more acknowledgement than inquiry. He looked up, eyes lighting with recognition, and gave a small nod. "It's peaceful," he said. "It reminds me that even in chaos, there's balance to be found if you look for it." And once again, she felt that familiar tug of inspiration. She wanted to argue, to tell him that chaos often felt more like a storm than a lesson, but she paused. There was something in his calm, in the way he carried certainty without arrogance, that forced her to reconsider her own approach to life. They walked together in silence for a while, the rhythm of their steps matching the flow of the river, each lost in thought but connected through presence. She noticed the way he observed details others might miss: the gentle sway of a tree branch, the subtle pattern in the clouds, the quiet determination of a man jogging alone at twilight. Each observation felt like a subtle lesson, reminding her that attention to detail, patience, and respect for the world's nuances were strengths in themselves. "Do you ever feel like you're not living fully, even when everything seems fine?" she asked suddenly, the words escaping before she could filter them. He considered her question for a moment, then spoke with the quiet conviction she had come to recognize. "Yes, and I've learned that the difference between living and existing often comes down to awareness. You can have wealth, comfort, recognition, but if you're not present, truly present, you miss the moments that give life meaning." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had always associated achievement with outward markers, titles, salary, accolades, but he was reminding her that impact and fulfillment came from a deeper, quieter source: intentionality, authenticity, and connection. That night, she returned home with a restless mind. Replaying the encounter over and over, she reflected on her career, her relationships, her daily choices, and realized how often she had moved on autopilot, chasing success, but missing significance. The realization was unsettling, but also energizing. It was the kind of revelation that doesn't demand immediate action, but plants a seed, one that grows quietly, changing perspectives and guiding decisions in subtle yet profound ways. In the days that followed, she began to notice patterns she had previously ignored. The way colleagues responded to kindness, the strength of those who remained calm under pressure, the subtle power of listening more than speaking. Each observation reinforced a new understanding that true strength was not always visible, that influence could be quiet, and that patience could accomplish far more than aggression ever could. Then came a moment that tested this newfound awareness. A major project, one she had poured herself into for months, hit an unexpected crisis. Clients were frustrated, timelines collapsed, and tempers flared. She felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the old reflex to push harder, control more, and force outcomes. But something stopped her, a memory of him, standing quietly, observing, and acting with intention rather than impulse. She took a deep breath, paused, and addressed the team calmly. Assessing the situation with clarity instead of panic, she listened to concerns, prioritized actions, and delegated responsibilities with precision. By the end of the evening, the crisis was contained not through force, but through patience, observation, and deliberate action. And as she left the office, she realized that she had internalized a lesson far more valuable than any business tactic. That power tempered by wisdom could achieve more than energy driven by stress ever could. The next day, he appeared in the lobby unexpectedly. "I heard you handled the storm well," he said, a subtle smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I could see it in your approach, the calm, the observation, the decision to act when necessary. That's true strength." For a moment, she didn't speak, overwhelmed by a mix of pride, relief, and gratitude. He didn't need to elaborate. The acknowledgement itself carried weight. She realized then that her growth wasn't about proving herself to anyone, including him. It was about aligning her actions with principles she had only recently begun to understand. That evening, she reflected on the subtle transformations of the past weeks. She understood that life wasn't a series of grand, explosive events, but a collection of quiet moments, deliberate choices, and consistent actions. She began to embrace the idea that inspiration often came from subtlety, from observing, reflecting, and learning from those who embodied the qualities she admired. As she lay in bed, the city lights casting a gentle glow through her window, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. It wasn't the absence of challenges, it was the presence of understanding, awareness, and the courage to act thoughtfully. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the journey ahead would continue to test her, challenge her, and inspire her. But she also knew she had discovered a new way to move through life, one grounded in patience, observation, and quiet strength. And in that understanding, she felt a spark of transformation, a recognition that her life was no longer defined solely by ambition or achievement, but by the choices she made in moments of clarity, the courage to pause, and the wisdom to act with intention. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor, yet she barely noticed. Her mind was alive with the echoes of the previous night's realization, buzzing with thoughts she hadn't allowed herself to fully explore until now. The small apartment felt different, less like a place to rest and more like a canvas where change could take root. Every corner, every shadow seemed to hold possibility. She moved through her morning routine almost mechanically, yet every motion felt charged with intent. Brushing her hair, making her coffee, stepping out into the city, it all carried a weight of awareness she had never experienced. She realized she had been living much of her life as if on autopilot, reacting to external pressures without considering the deeper currents shaping her decisions. The encounters with him, the way he existed in the world with quiet authority, had awakened a hunger for a more meaningful life. That day, she found herself walking past the office lobby, the glass doors reflecting her own image back at her. She paused, noticing the faint lines of tension around her eyes, the set of her shoulders, and the way she held herself. It was a moment of clarity she couldn't ignore. She had been projecting confidence, but her inner world was restless, incomplete, searching for something undefined. And she realized she wasn't alone in that search. He appeared then, as if the universe had conspired to make the timing perfect. Leaning against the railing outside, a book in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, he exuded a calm that was almost tangible. The sight of him made her chest tighten, not with longing, exactly, but with recognition. The kind that comes when you meet someone who reflects what you've been missing in yourself. "You're early," he said with a small smile, eyes scanning hers if measuring the shifts within her. "I could say the same," she replied, though her voice wavered slightly. She felt exposed, not in vulnerability, but in the raw honesty of confronting her own growth. They walked together without speaking for a few blocks, each step carrying an unspoken understanding. The city thrummed around them, a symphony of movement and sound, yet they existed in a bubble of quiet reflection. She noticed how he moved through the world, attentive, deliberate, present. It was a rhythm she had long forgotten, but instinctively recognized as powerful. "You've changed," he said finally, his voice steady but imbued with warmth. "There's a different energy about you. I can see it in the way you carry yourself, in the way you respond rather than react. It's subtle, but it's there." Her chest tightened at the observation, a mix of surprise and validation. She had felt it too, the subtle shift within herself, but hearing it reflected in someone she respected gave it a weight she hadn't anticipated. "I've been noticing things differently," she admitted. "Small details, moments I used to overlook. It's like life has been moving too fast, and I finally stopped to breathe, to see what's really happening." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "Awareness is the beginning of change. Once you notice, you can decide how to respond. That's where power lies, not in force, but in intention." The simplicity of his words struck her with a force that belied their calm delivery. She realized that so much of her life had been spent proving herself, climbing ladders, meeting expectations, winning approval without ever pausing to consider whether it aligned with her true purpose. And in that realization, a new kind of clarity emerged. Success was meaningless without presence, without reflection, without alignment with values she had only recently begun to define. The week that followed became a series of deliberate experiments. She approached every interaction with heightened awareness, listening more than speaking, observing before acting. She noticed the subtle ways people responded to patience and empathy, how clarity of thought could diffuse tension more effectively than force. She discovered that influence could be gentle, that leadership didn't require domination, and that true strength was often invisible to the untrained eye. One evening, after a particularly demanding day, she found herself back at the riverside. The city lights shimmered on the water, and he was already there, sketching, writing, reflecting. She approached quietly, drawn by the magnetism of his calm presence. "You're here a lot," she said, though it was more a statement than a question. "I like the perspective it offers," he replied. "It reminds me that even in motion, we can find stillness, that in observation, we find understanding, and that understanding leads to wisdom." She sat beside him, letting the words sink in. It was a rare moment of silence, yet rich with meaning. The realization struck her again. Life wasn't about the grand gestures or explosive victories. It was in these small, intentional moments that transformation occurred. And he, without realizing it, had become a catalyst for her evolution, teaching lessons not through lectures or commands, but through presence, integrity, and unwavering self-awareness. Days turned into weeks, and each encounter, each observation, deepened her understanding of herself and the world around her. She noticed the resilience in others, the quiet courage of those who persevered without recognition, the subtle power of patience and empathy in the face of adversity. And with each insight, she grew more aligned with the principles he exemplified: awareness, intention, reflection, and measured action. Then came a challenge that tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated. A personal crisis emerged, a situation that threatened not just her career, but her sense of identity and self-worth. Panic and fear tried to take hold, old patterns of reaction threatening to resurface. But she paused, remembered the lessons she had internalized, and acted with deliberate clarity. She assessed, prioritized, and navigated the crisis with a calm she hadn't known she possessed. By the end, the storm had passed not through force, but through awareness, patience, and intentional action. And in that victory, small as it might seem to the outside world, she recognized the depth of her own transformation. She no longer needed external validation, nor the approval of peers or strangers. She had discovered the power of presence, the strength of patience, and the quiet authority of intentional living. As she returned home that night, she realized that life had become more vivid, more meaningful, and infinitely more manageable. The journey was far from over, but she understood now that transformation didn't happen in a single moment. It unfolded quietly, deliberately, through choices made with awareness and courage. And she knew, with certainty, that the most profound changes often came from the smallest, quietest encounters, the lessons that waited patiently to be discovered, and the people who, by simply existing with integrity, inspired others to become more than they ever imagined. She had always believed that transformation was gradual, that change crept in slowly, like water shaping stone over decades. But that morning, as the city hummed to life beneath her window, she realized that some shifts arrived suddenly, tipping everything into a new perspective with the force of clarity. The night before had been long, filled with reflection and restless thought, yet when she awoke, she felt different. Not fragile, not searching, but aligned, focused, ready. The memory of the last conversation with him lingered, like a gentle echo in her mind. His words about presence, awareness, and measured action had lodged themselves deep in her consciousness, reshaping the way she viewed her own choices. She remembered his steady gaze, the subtle warmth in his voice, and how entirely unforced his influence had been. It struck her then, the most powerful lessons rarely come with loud declarations or dramatic displays. True inspiration was quiet, persistent, transformative, and it often came from someone who never demanded attention, but commanded it anyway. By being wholly themselves, that day, she carried herself differently. Even the routine commute felt infused with a newfound energy. She noticed the way strangers moved, the kindness in small gestures, the subtle resilience of people enduring hardships she would never fully see. She realized that her own strength wasn't defined by victories over others, nor by accolades, nor by material accumulation. It was defined by the ability to observe, respond, and choose consciously in every moment. He appeared again, at the corner cafe they had begun frequenting. The moment their eyes met, she felt the unspoken acknowledgement of shared understanding. He smiled, not broadly, but in that quiet, knowing way that suggested connection far deeper than casual familiarity. They walked together through the streets, past the familiar rhythm of urban life, but the world felt different, somehow sharper, fuller, richer. Each sound, each scent, each interaction seemed to hold layers of meaning she had previously overlooked. "You're different today," he remarked, voice low, but carrying an unmistakable warmth. "I can see it in the way you move, the way you hold yourself. You've internalized what you've learned, haven't you?" She nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "I think I've finally realized that control doesn't mean domination. Strength doesn't mean force. And success isn't about winning, it's about living aligned with who you are." He regarded her quietly for a moment, then said, "And that alignment is more powerful than anything else. Once you find it, you don't just navigate the world, you transform it." Those words resonated deeply, echoing in her mind long after they parted ways that afternoon. She walked home slowly, savoring the sensation of clarity and the sense of purpose that now guided her steps. For the first time in years, she felt a profound harmony between her inner world and the outer life she inhabited. The fear of inadequacy, the pressure to perform, the invisible chains of expectation all had loosened their grip, replaced by the quiet confidence that comes from true self-awareness. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, she continued to practice the lessons she had absorbed. She approached challenges with patience, uncertainty with curiosity, and setbacks with resilience. She found that people responded differently to her not because she demanded it, but because she radiated authenticity and calm confidence. She began mentoring colleagues, offering guidance not from authority, but from understanding and empathy. She realized that leadership wasn't about directing others, it was about inspiring them to recognize their own potential. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, she returned to the riverside. He was already there, as if waiting for her, sketching in silence. She joined him, settling beside him on the grass, feeling the rhythmic pulse of the water and the gentle hum of the city. "You've grown," he said simply, eyes reflecting the fading light. Not just in knowledge, not just in skill, but in presence. That's the rarest growth of all. She smiled, a deep, authentic expression of gratitude and realization. I've learned that life isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about showing up, being aware, making deliberate choices, and embracing both strength and vulnerability. I've learned that the quietest moments hold the greatest power. He nodded, and they sat together in companionable silence, the world around them moving in its endless rhythm. And in that quiet, she recognized the culmination of her journey. She had transformed not through force, not through grand gestures, but through awareness, reflection, and the courage to embrace her own authenticity. That night, as she returned home, she looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had been shaped by challenges, inspired by wisdom, and strengthened by experience. She had learned to listen, to pause, to act with intention, and to trust in her own resilience. The lesson she had internalized would continue to guide her, shaping every decision, every interaction, every choice. She was no longer reacting to life. She was engaging with it fully, with presence, with courage, and with clarity. And she realized, finally, that transformation wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about discovering the strength and wisdom that had always been within her. The moments that had once seemed ordinary, the brief encounters, the subtle words, the quiet gestures were now understood as pivotal, shaping forces. She smiled, knowing that her life had shifted irrevocably, guided by awareness, intentionality, and the quiet power of someone who had taught her to see herself more clearly than she ever had before. She had arrived at a place of peace, strength, and unshakable clarity, and it was there, in that alignment of heart, mind, and purpose, that she finally understood the essence of true growth. It isn't loud, it isn't immediate, and it doesn't demand attention. True transformation is quiet, persistent, deliberate, and unstoppable.